Hello, my name is Sally Timmins and I'm an advisory manager within the education and charities team at Bishop Fleming. I'm a national leader of governance and also chair of trustees at Torquay Girls Grammar School, which is one of the top performing secondary schools in the UK. I've been a governor since 2008 and been in the sector involvement and walked that path, so I understand the challenges faced by trustees these days. I'm delighted to be joined by Christian Jenkins from Connect Academy Trust, and together we're discussing the value of effective governance, what that means and why it's important within today's multi-academy trusts. So welcome, Christian. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My career has largely been in the commercial sector. After a brief spell in the army, I moved into what we call the professional services sector as a headhunter, which actually proved to be incredibly useful in my latter part of my career when I joined the Connect Multi-Academy Trust as a trustee. So a fairly extensive period as a headhunter, and then made a massive career transition to become Director of Operations of the Plymouth Science Park, which is, for those of you who know it, is a large science and technology centre with about 150 businesses, largely in innovation and technology. And it was in that period that I was approached to become a trustee of Connect Multi-Academy Trust. And then after a year, I was invited to step up to become the chair. In addition to that, I'm also the chair of a second multi-academy trust based in Cornwall called WAVE, very different from Connect in that they are an alternative provider. So it gives me actually a much broader perspective of how trusts function, the difference in different types of education that's provided, and also a broader perspective on governance and trust board constitution.
Great, thank you. So as a very highly experienced member of the community and chair and very obviously business-wise individual, what do you think makes an effective board from your perspective, and how important is that in today's governance?
There's two things. Firstly, the definition of effectiveness, because as we know, the whole academy movement has evolved significantly from when it started 10 years ago. So when Connect became a trust in 2016, it needed a board that had individuals with a skill set to help them transition through from local authority control to academy. We're now at a phase where we have embedded all of the processes and procedures, so we're functioning effectively with 5 good Ofsted outcomes, but we now need to look at where we go next. And given the sort of guidance from the DFE about size and how important size is as a trust in order to reach critical mass, we have a two-pronged strategy. One is centred on growth. We know we do need to be larger than a five academy trust, and to do that we need to find something that is unique and that differentiates us from other trusts, certainly in Plymouth. And this is where having a board which has a knowledge and skill set that can help a trust, broaden its outlook and look beyond, pure education to create its kind of distinctive role, in this case within Plymouth. So last year we looked at how we could develop the trust, and we developed what is now the Ocean Conservation Curriculum, and this is a unique development in shaping a curriculum that is centred on ocean conservation, which will be delivered to all the year groups across the trust. And what has amazed me in particular is how unique that is in the country as we speak. And given the fact that we are a maritime nation, that Plymouth is an ocean city, it was quite easy for me, coming from a business background and not an education background, to see the opportunity of bringing together, the resource that we had as a trust and marrying it with the expertise, the brand and the knowledge that existed, in our case, in Plymouth. So bringing the various parties together, supporting Stuart and the executive team to create the ocean conservation, frankly, as a result of having a trust board that has people in it who can see beyond pure education, but see how they bring the real value added services that I think the academy movement was designed for in the first place. And so for us, that's a big tick in the box. I think your second question on governance and how important that is that, I will say this, but we have great governance in place at Connect. So what does that mean? Well, it means that the trustees have a huge amount of confidence in the executive team. That's triangulated by the input from auditors and other external agencies that confirm that Connect is functioning effectively, the Ofsted reports, etc. And what it does then is give us confidence in supporting the executive team when they come to us with ideas, plans, options, etc. And it also, frankly, frees us up to focus on the value add that we can bring to the trust in terms of enhancing children's education. Now, when I speak to my peers in other trusts, obviously without mentioning any names, a lot of their time is spent focusing on getting good governance in place, which is the right thing to do. So I can see how a trust board can be far more effective in taking a trust into new territory when they're freed of having to spend too much time getting the governance in place. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So how do you think your governance, your trust governance, has been affected by the COVID situation? Do you think that things have been more challenging? Do you think it's been more focused, or do you think it's business as usual and you're just working remotely?
Yeah, business as usual, Sal. Yeah, I mean, I haven't lost any sleep about this at all. No, I think, and I'm sure many of my peers would agree, when the realization hit us as trustees that the liability for the wider opening of our schools rested with us as the employer, I think there were quite a few trustees who, frankly wanted to take a bit of a rain check on their commitment, and I don't blame them. And I can tell you, I had a number of lengthy phone calls with trustees explaining that yes, of course we are liable, but trust me, what we're doing is the right thing to do. Now, what we were able to do was, because we had the trust that the governance for Connect, Matt, was robust and solid. What it meant was, when Stuart and the executive team were presenting the risk assessments, the opening plans, the health and safety checks, etc., we were 100% confident that the due diligence done by them to get us ready for the wider opening was absolutely 100% robust. So whilst we were nervous about taking on that liability, what we weren't concerned about was the quality of the work done by the team, which was underpinned by an absolute rock solid base of governance.
That's fantastic. So the trustees, what you're telling me there is that the trustees had the right amount of assurance from the work undertaken by your executives that the risk assessment was robust, as good as it can be within government guidelines and all information available, and that the trust board were able to effectively get that assurance that they needed, that the wider opening of schools was a safe step to take, and therefore collectively you were in a position to agree to accept more pupils into the care of the trust.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And frankly, if we'd spent the previous 2 or 3 years constantly chasing the executive to improve the quality of governance in the trust, we would have been far more nervous about trusting their recommendations on the wider reopening. So actually, having made those phone calls, it was easy, frankly, to get a unanimous support of the trustees for the reopening.
What's your opinion of internal assurance generally? How do you feel that aids and gives that additional layer of assurance to the trustees in connection with those really difficult decisions that sometimes trustees are facing? And let's not forget, trustees are volunteers, so it is a big responsibility to take on in lots of cases.
I think a key part of it is transparency. Transparency of the information that's presented to us. transparency when senior executives are challenged about the information that they're presenting. You know, when you read about some of the horror stories that have existed in the country with other trusts, I look at it and I'm surprised actually that these trusts were able to get away with some of the things that they do, because you know, from a business perspective, you just wouldn't have allowed that lack of oversight to have existed. However, that's the past. So you know, going back to your point, it is all about the quality of the information that's presented, and that when it's challenged, the executive are able to put up an effective and transparent defence of you know, of some of the more technical aspects of governance.
So those questions of how do we know that our risks have been effectively addressed, mitigated as much as reasonably possible, how are the trustees assured you were able to answer those questions with the processes that had been undertaken, because you were confident to challenge it, your board had the right knowledge, skills and understanding to make those appropriate challenges and be in receipt of that assurance that things were good?
Yeah, and this I think is where having a board of diverse experiences and skills is really important, because when you have a board of you know, the same type of people, you know, if we had a trustee board of people all from the education sector, I would struggle, and it's no disrespect to them at all, but they would struggle to ask the kind of questions that people like me would ask. Now, I ask questions because I don't know. And I make no bones about the fact that there's an awful lot about education that I don't know. And because I don't know, I will ask the question. And sometimes a simple question can really shed light on something that you know, the executive just take for granted. And so it's quite reassuring when they come back and say, oh, I hadn't really thought of it like that. I mean, it sounds trivial, but actually it's that kind of simple probing question that reveals more and more information, and then collectively it creates a greater level of assurance. It's when the executives aren't able to ask that question, or you sense that they're just pulling away from it, that your radar starts to think, that didn't quite sound right, and so you push and you push and you push and you push, and then, you know, as the sort of triangulation, it's people like yourselves that come in and, you know, will either confirm the trustees' suspicions or recommendations, or throw in the kind of oversight that you get from having worked across multiple trusts. So, you know, so that's what I would expect an auditor to say is, well, Chris, that's interesting that you're doing that. Did you know? And that, you know, that helps us to ask those questions and think, okay, well, we seem to be doing it okay, but there is clearly a much better way and more efficient way of doing it. And this is where I think auditors need to be equally as robust as trustees, and they mustn't shy away, as I know you don't, from not just challenging the trustees and the executive team, but also providing value add. You know, this is where your experience, you as an NGA rep, you know, you should be able to add value to the whole relationship that you have with us.
Fantastic, thank you.
That was a really good plug, wasn't it, for you?
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you, Christian, about additional information you've accessed during this period, and you mentioned that the trustees became aware that the liability fell on their shoulders in relation to this wider opening of schools. Have you managed to take part in any of the Bishop Fleming webinars that have been put on? Have you found them very helpful, or how have they aided the trust governance?
Yes, yes, I have. There's a number of webinars from yourselves. There's also the Confederation of School Trusts that have proved to be an invaluable source of guidance and help, which I know that, well, it would appear that most trusts are sort of focusing their attention on that. But what auditors such as yourself do is bring very high levels of expertise and knowledge in the sort of key critical areas, which, when you really want to know something about a particular subject, it's really good to come to an expert and say, okay, right, what is the legal framework around this particular issue? So I have referred to quite a lot of the stuff that you guys have been producing, just to give me reassurance when I have a chat with my trustees and the board, saying, okay, well, look, this is what Bishop Fleming is saying. So, because we do want to play safe, you know, this is not a time to take risks. And we probably lean very heavily on the professional advisors such as yourself for the very definitive interpretation of an action we might be taking. So I'm sure many trustees and chairs have said, well, Bishop Fleming have said, so I think there's a slightly shared liability there with the professional services sector.
That's interesting. Thanks very much. Can I ask you about financial governance in particular and how important you feel that part plays within the overall governance structure, and particularly compliance with the financial handbook and the regulations? And obviously this funding stream has remained one of the few solid, reliable, non-variable funding streams through this COVID period. So how important is financial governance and compliance in your opinion, do you think?
Well, it's one of the top three. I mean, it's one of the main three items that a trust board is responsible for, you know, financial probity, and it is the one that has tripped up most trusts that have failed. So yeah, it's in the top three. We have to work really hard, and this again is where having expertise on the board helps tremendously when we can challenge the CFOs about the finances. You say that this the funding stream has continued throughout this. You're absolutely right, but of course what it did throw up was some financial risks, which we clearly hadn't planned for. Indeed, nobody could have planned for it. So we definitely had to probe very deeply into what the financial risks were, the impact on the bottom line, the impact on funding for next term, etc. So I can't underplay how important it is. But it gives the trust a huge amount of reassurance that we entered this period in a very strong financial state. We get regular updates on our finances. I wouldn't quite say on a weekly basis, but far more regular than normal, because it's a moving feast, isn't it? This is something that we've never experienced before, and when you have that degree of uncertainty, making sure that the finances are robust to deal with the next initiative that the government may be sending our way is absolutely critical. That's
great. Christian, thank you so much for your input. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today. Thank you for your wisdom.
I can take my shirt off and put my t-shirt back on now.
Your insights and your opinion is always very valuable, and I'm sure that everybody watching will hear the passion in your voice in connection with governance, and very proudly so of your Connect Academy trusts. Thank you for talking to us about the value of governance within schools and education, and the progressive purposes for which multi-academy trusts aspire. So thanks again.